A Manousso Musing with Patricia Barret on money and matrimony, part of the series Manousso Musing with seasoned mediator trainer Dr. Barbara Manousso. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact dependent. Hi again, everybody. This is Mac Pierre-Louis, attorney, mediator, and arbitrator working throughout Florida and Texas.
And Natalia Orłowska-Czajka, based in Warsaw, Poland, advocate and mediator.
And I'm Dr. Barbara Sunderland Manousso in Houston, Texas, and in Newport, Rhode Island. And I'm a trainer as well as a practitioner. But part of our training program with Manousso Mediation and Arbitration is Patricia Barret. And Patricia has been with us, I think, about 15, 20 years now. And she's a CFP as well as a CDFA. So if you'll, Patricia, welcome to Manousso Musing. And if you'll just tell us what those initials mean and how they influence money and matrimony. But we'll get to a question in a minute. Please just explain the importance of the credentials that you have. And welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Well, certified financial planner is a special level of education for a financial planner. It requires a college degree underneath it, and then it's college level classes in financial planning, taxes, estate planning, etc., that gives you special skills for both married people or divorcing people. And there's a big final exam. So I was very proud to get that stuck on the back of my name about 25 years ago. CDFA, I achieved about 19 years ago. That is Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. So that was when I founded my company and started working with people who were going to go through divorce.
Well, thank you, Patricia. And of course, you are a mediator, and you also work quite a bit in collaborative law, which is a very friendly way for people to find a solution should they be divorcing. But one topic I think that is important that a lot of people don't think about is as they marry and they unite with somebody else, often the stars are in their eyes and they don't think about, well, if this goes sour, where will I be then? And I do think that there's a lot of older people that are getting married, and the women are more business savvy, and maybe it's not their first marriage. So they're very careful on, more careful perhaps, on the financial side of uniting with somebody. And I was telling a story that going back, and it'll be 30 years next week with my husband, but when we got married, before we got married, I did two things that I thought were important. And I had been a businesswoman, and I was in my early 40s at the time. So now you know my age. But what we did, I wanted a complete financial statement from him and disclosure. I wanted to know what he made, what he saved, and if he had any debt. Because I would meet some men that were very wealthy that would come on, they'd look interesting, and then I would hear them talk. And being a mediator, I listen to what they don't say. So I was often very nervous about somebody who was completely tied to a bank. It wasn't their money they've been playing with all this time. So John came before our wedding with everything in calligraphy. He did calligraphy, but he had all his financial information for me of everything that he had. And I also got references. So I called his work, I called his church, I called some friends from the Greek community, and he passed with flying colors. And I think this is wisdom for anybody getting married. but especially for an older person. So that's just a personal anecdote. So now I want your professional advice, please, Patricia. What do you advise people to know, to ask, and to get from somebody before a wedding? When you have these bridal fairs and people are worried about how many guests they can have and what the color of their napkins, they don't think to ask about the bones of their relationship. So, from a professional perspective, what should people think about and be prepared for as they go into a union with and it's a business deal with somebody else? What would you professionally advise them, please? And welcome again to Manousso Musing.
Well, you just gave a great little talk yourself on what should be done. And that is, of course, to look into their finances, ideally get a credit report on them as well. You might Google them, see what you can find online. I've often thought I should have a booth at the wedding,
Yes.
these bridal extravaganzas,
Mhm.
and encourage those getting married to do a financial plan up front. I
Mhm.
mean, now they need to get on the same page about spending and saving and growing their assets together. And a lot of these bridal extravaganzas is going to be the mother of the bride and the bride. And I could see the mother of the bride being ever so interested in this because of the fear of the unknown. Okay, I'll give you an example. I know one lady who married a guy, of course, just being in love and not very financially savvy, only to find out he had $100,000 in IRS backed taxes outstanding.
Wow.
Now, of course, I mean, if we're looking down the road at divorce, she would be due a reimbursement for that. But we're not talking about divorce. We're talking about marriage, is that they have to pay that off before they can really start saving for the down payment on a house.
Mhm.
But this is also a good time to look at budgeting and see what each person's attitude about spending is. What's the most important? Should we also have a individual savings account that's for us alone? Each of us have our play money, a certain dollar amount of our own earnings. But should we have a vacation account? Should we have everything mingled? I have people that I see who never set up a joint account and just keep everything separate. That's a recipe for disaster in itself. You need to share with each other. You know, you have physical intimacy in a marriage. Well, you also need financial intimacy. You need to share what you've got, share your views about money, even sharing your background about your childhood finances, because this has affected your attitudes, is your parents' attitudes and where you grew up.
Wow, that's very, very important wisdom.
And having said that, I want you to reflect on something I see these days. Back on to what you have just said, that people don't really take it seriously enough. They don't plan ahead. Quite a lot of people imagine I'm entrepreneurs. In order to protect their future family, they enter into marriage with the separation of assets regime. Everybody keeps everything separate. Wife at this very beginning feels so much protected. She is not responsible for any debts the husband might incur. But what happens next after 10 years or 15 years? And this is like a plague now for me. I'm seeing these women being advised by their families who tell them, so what? You married a very wealthy man and you're coming out of this marriage with nothing? You didn't have anything in your common names? So you just have children, you have your own salary, and where is the wealth you should be going and growing and getting together? And upon this
Right.
advice, these women decide to split. I have women advised by the families to divorce these men that the women originally married.
Wow.
Well, of course, now you're getting over into a pre-marital agreement, a legal document, especially if the husband is very wealthy, he's going to probably require it. And that usually is going to allow him to keep all the dividends and interest on his separate property as separate, which normally would be community. But here we go again to the wife being in the dark. That's what I see a lot, is that she is very wrapped up in being a homemaker and raising the children. That's her stage of life right now. She's the young mother and she doesn't even know what's going on. She's got this absolute trust in him to manage the finances. So I recommend that they have a meeting once a month, sit at the kitchen table and look at their accounts, look at their savings, see where they are on their goals. And of course, they should establish specific financial goals. They'll probably need a college savings account as well as savings for their own retirement. But she should be kept in the know, because otherwise she can start feeling a bitterness. It's going to create a separation between them, even on an emotional level, if she's kept in the dark. So it's very important that there's transparency between the two of them. And of course, if you're marrying a wealthy man, women need to understand. They think, oh yeah, I'm marrying a wealthy man. But guess what? If you ever get a divorce, all that wealth is his separate property. Sure, we can trace some dividends and interest that may be community, but in general, he has probably got it set up, most men do, where it will still all be his money. And so that's what you were talking about, Natalia, is that, a woman can come out of a marriage to a wealthy man with nothing but her own earnings and maybe some child support. So the transparency is so important, and to establish this intimacy on a financial level. It will carry over to the bedroom too. I mean, there's nothing, if you're bitter about money, it's not going to create a romantic atmosphere in the bedroom.
It's true.
Yes.
It's true.
So I got so much to say. All right. But we don't have a lot of time. Okay. But before I ask these rapid fire questions, want to share my screen. This is your website. The best way people can get in touch with you, Patricia, is on your website, correct? LifeTimePlanning.cc.
And her phone number.
Yes, there is a
Yes.
wealth of information.
Okay, great. So if you're listening to this episode, make sure you head over to the YouTube channel to see what we're looking at on the screen share. But if you go to LifeTimePlanning.cc, that's where you'll get everything you need. And there's a phone number, of course. So here's what I got. When you were talking, I was like, man, that's so good. So
She's
three
real.
rapid fire questions. Okay. Number one, do you think that the most important thing out of all these discussions is the word transparency? You just used it a second ago, that if there's no transparency, people are going to naturally feel that things are being hidden from them. They're going to feel cheated. So the operative word is transparency. If people can live by transparency, they probably will go a long way towards not having much problems. What do you think? Transparency.
Well, yes. Okay. The transparency problem could be solved by this monthly meeting I mentioned. And at that point, you're going to review all the accounts. You need to be also reviewing the tax return very carefully. How many women just sign it? Or nowadays, you don't even have to sign it. You just submit it. And the wife never looks at it. She doesn't know how much he makes. She doesn't see his pay stub. This also needs to be at the kitchen table. This is part of the sharing. And she should be able to celebrate with him his successes in his raises and if he gets an executive compensation package like restricted stock. She should be knowledgeable about this. It seems like some men want to hold these things back. It's like this part of themselves they're not sharing. And, this can come back to bite him because he needs to establish this intimacy on a financial level as well as in the bedroom.
Next, thank you so much for that. In the materials that you sent us for your biography, I saw this slide that was very interesting to me. Can you speak very quickly about the importance of home ownership when people are planning to get married? I mean, this is shocking to me, just how much having a piece of real estate could contribute so much to your lifetime plans, by being a homeowner. What are your thoughts on having a piece of property?
All right. Of course, the home is a important thing if you've got little kids and you want them to have continuity. So there's an emotional aspect to that for the woman. And maybe she's decorated it, but she's not thinking really in a business-like manner. First, she has to be sure she can afford the home. And it's one thing for her to end up with a $500,000 home and him $500,000 in assets, but now she's got to make the payments on that home.
Right.
She has to build her own retirement. So she has not made a smart business-like decision. I know one case came to me and they just announced to me that she was keeping the house. It was obviously too much for her to handle. And that, he was keeping this and that, and told me about the child support. Sometimes I work with both parties. And the way I handled it was to do a cash flow statement. Her earnings, her support payment, her taxes, her expenses, and a bottom line is called the net cash flow. So when we incorporate that into a 20-year spreadsheet, you can see how she's going to manage, or in the case of that graph, how she is not going to manage. So sometimes I do that graph with and without the house. Here's your net worth with the house, and here's your net worth without it. So you don't want to be house poor. That's a financial planning term.
Exactly.
House poor, and that's where you've got nothing but the house or very little but the house.
Yes. And one last thing, if you can give me 10-second answer, what is the impact if somebody's coming to a relationship with you, but they have a bunch of child support debt, a lot of child support arrears? I think that's a recipe to make things blow up. But what are your thoughts? And then I'm done.
Okay. Now, legally, if they ever get divorced, that's his separate debt, right? But that doesn't matter. During the marriage, y'all are going to have to pay that down together. So my thoughts are that kitchen table meeting where you establish how that's going to be paid off and have a finite budget that shows how you can also save for retirement. Maybe you have to forego vacations for a couple of years in order to pay down the debt. But of course, paying down the debt needs to be paramount.
And before we go further, I also wanted to ask you something, because in theory, it sounds so good. Transparency, kitchen table meeting. I think that there are men who treat their finances as something so intimate to them that they don't want to share it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any tricks to make them open themselves to women and just speak?
Mm-hmm. Well, I do. And this would be for the wife to sit in on a meeting with the financial advisor and go over their investments. Also to sit in on a meeting with the CPA and go over the tax return, because possibly she won't understand the tax return. I mean, she could sit down with me and I can explain the tax return to her and what his Social Security earnings are and then his total earnings, his net earnings would be after his contributions to retirement plans. But just to be able to explain things to her so that she could be more in the know, and then that would kind of force him into sharing with her.
Thank you, Patricia. That's very, very good wisdom. And in the 30 years that I've been mediating the family cases, two things I want to bring up. One is that men have a tendency when they want a divorce, they're strategic. A woman is emotional. A man is focused. And I've had men even come and say that their financial person who they're talking to, not with their wife, which you're recommending. So that's any women that are listening to this broadcast, tell your friends to make sure that you meet with Patricia Barret and their CPA before, during increments on a regular basis, so they understand what the financial statements are. But I've had people tell me that they have planned for like 3 years their divorce. They were with Bambi. They've been fooling around with her, and they were on their way out the door. And more than one person, and they have the nerve to tell me, which I find like, this is not going to be a fun mediation. And how far back? I tell people now 5 years. I have that on my website, manousso.us. I have a list of things that people should do before a divorce. But I recommend they get all their financial information and go back 5 years. In case the guy has been told to look back 3 years, supersede them. What would you recommend, Patricia?
Okay, the 5 years is a good rule of thumb. But now my newest case, when we found out that she had been paying all the expenses on his separate property house for 25 years, she was able to find 25 years of tax returns, and they're in my inbox. So, that was a special circumstance. I need to go through there and find all the property taxes and homeowner insurance that was paid on his property. And here he was, pocketing the rental income, and she was making the payments. So this is going to be crucial, but it depends on the case. So yeah, the rule of thumb is about 5 years of statements. But in some cases, if the husband's been planning this divorce, you may need to look back further. So sometimes I ask the wife, how long has divorce been in the air?
And that's very, very important. And just as an older woman who has heard a lot of these stories over the years, I also want to just add as a comment that how a man is in bed is how he handles his money. How a man handles his money will also reflect in bed. So if something is out of line, you've got a heads up. And so
we're not going to ask for details on that. Okay.
No, and it's not my stories. I'm just talking about things that I've heard through these divorces over the years, and they seem to line up, unfortunately, true to form. So,
but Barbara, is it also true about women?
Well, it's both ways, because they both have their pattern of living and their intimacy with a partner. And Patricia well used the word intimacy isn't just for the bank or the monies. It also goes in the bedroom. Intimacy is intimacy. It's like a man who cheats on his wife is going to cheat in business, or a woman who cheats in business is going to cheat in life. So people are consistent, and there's a consistency. So on that closing note, Patricia Barret, a CFP, CDFA, thank you for bringing your words of wisdom to Manousso Musing. And this was Money and Matrimony on Manousso Musing. Thank you, Patricia Barret.
Thank you so much.